Great, thanks, Raph. All right, our next panel will be moderated by an experienced media executive. Chris Bassett is the National Director of Content and Editorial Standards for Global News. His position oversees editorial content creation for all national and local platforms, including television, online, and radio. Prior to moving to Toronto, Chris worked in Calgary as the news director, station manager for Global Calgary, and has also worked for CTV News, CBC News, and ABC News over his career. Please welcome Chris and the rest of our panelists.
All right, thank you very much. I'm very appreciative of the opportunity to speak with you today and share the stage with three very interesting individuals to talk about news and journalism, the shifting relationship in our digital age. So I think we've got a lot to get through, a lot of questions from me, and we want to provide the opportunity for you to ask some as well. So we'll motor through the content as best we can, and feel free to save your questions to the end. We'll make sure that there's time for you to ask them. So the easiest question of the panel today, I guess, maybe if we can go through, maybe starting with you, Shauna, with some introductions, a quick minute of who you are and what brings you here to this panel this afternoon.
All right. Sounds good. Does this work? Yes. Hi. I'm Shauna Rempel. I work at Global News with Chris Bassett. And I'm the National Managing Editor for Social Media and Distribution. But I do find that we go much further beyond social media with my team. We're thinking about driving audience to TV, driving audience to radio, to our legacy media products, but also to our podcasts, to our newsletters, and to various apps like Apple News and things like that. So really happy to be here and talking about all things audience and social media as well.
Hey, I'm Farhan Mohamed. I'm the editor-in-chief and one of the partners at Daily Hive. We're a Vancouver-based publication. We started in 2008 creating hyperlocal content, started as a blog and then expanded from there. We're currently across the country in Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, Toronto, Montreal, and a few weeks ago just launched in Seattle and Portland. And so we cover everything that's happening in a city: news, food, business, sports, events, politics, you name it, we'll be covering it.
Hello everyone, I'm Marissa Roberto. I'm the host of Digital Sports Center. This is a TSN brand. It's on TSN's Instagram. Every single day we're Canada's first daily digital sports show. So excited to be a part of that team. Before that though, I came from video games and esports. So I would host television shows about esports, host esports events, and then before that I just hosted a couple of different shows on Canadian television, reviewing video games. I was very heavily into video games, and I'm still trying to bring video games over to TSN. It's a slow burn, but it's gonna happen.
Great, thanks. So I think, we wanted to start today talking about that relationship between traditional media and social media, or sort of non-traditional forms of that traditional media. It's called a lot of things: conventional, which is such a conventional term; traditional, which sounds so old and stuffy. But I think the reality is we've been engaged on this project of a new way of telling stories and a new way of informing our audiences. So maybe we can start by asking the question of what you're doing now as an organization or as an individual that you weren't doing, a year ago even, or 2 years ago. And maybe Shauna, with Global News, a very traditional, conventional news organization in its past. How's that transformation been for you and the team?
Sure. And make it sound kind of boring, but Global News has, we do all things, right? We do a lot of local news. We do some sports, some business, international news as well. So we're a general interest news organization, right? So some of the things we've been doing is for the past 3 years, since we joined Chorus Entertainment Inc., now we have radio stations. So we're trying to do more of that. We are able to clip interviews that are on the radio and put them out on our social channels and embed them in our stories on our website, globalnews.ca. Everybody bookmark that. And so those are some of the things that we're doing. We're also trying to make sure that we're optimizing for our various social channels. So Instagram, we're going to talk about that, right? We already have been. we've seen huge growth on Instagram in our audience, and so we're doing more where we're programming a story a day on our Instagram stories, making sure we're putting that through to Facebook, and actually getting our reporters to tag us when they're out and about, so that we're able to easily share it to our larger branded accounts. Just really trying to find out where our audience is really spending their time, and make sure that we're hitting them there, and also letting them know that we have these legacy traditional media products like our website, like our radio stations, like our TV stations.
So Marissa, I'm going to jump over to you next. Passing by Farhan for a moment, just because another very traditional company,
Yeah.
Bell Media and TSN, maybe, it wasn't always the case that you had dedicated sports channels, so those arrived on the scene for, quite a many decades now. But you are finding yourself as sort of in the new media sphere for also now sort of a legacy way of telling sports. So
Yeah.
how is that, what do you find for you that's like?
For me, it's incredible because this is exactly how I want to get my sports news. It's 3 to 4 minutes every single day on Instagram. Whatever happened the night before, we quickly recap and then just give you a look ahead of what's coming and what stats are important. Sometimes we get a little betting action in there too, because my producer really loves to gamble. So we get little snippets of that, but we also are able to interact with our audience to find out, what they're interested in, or we'll do little polls. We'll utilize the platform to our advantage to create more engagement, so people will share more and comment more. I love it personally because just coming from video games, I've always had a very male-dominated audience, and I thought I would have the same here going into sports with Instagram, but I'm finding that more women are reaching out now, getting excited about this is a great way for them to get in their sports news as well, because it's hard too. There's like a barrier of entry if you haven't been into sports before, so this is like a very quick, digestible way to kind of learn what's happening in the Canadian sports scene. I'm just over the moon with my team. They are the Bar Down Boys. So if you know anything about TSN, there's also a component to them called Bar Down, and they're very young, they're very in the now, very digital focused, and so they brought that personality into the show that I work on every day. So it's been a really great back and forth with those boys, the young, very on the ground journalists mixed with producers from the SportsCenter newsroom. So it's been a good back and forth.
Thanks. And then Farhan, so a little bit of a different experience for the Daily Hive. So maybe you can walk us through, you maybe don't have that tradition, the legacy, the conventional, but I imagine that, you've had to transform as well to keep up.
Yeah, one of the biggest things that we've shifted over the past couple of years specifically is that we've gone from having one brand and one identity to having multiple brands, multiple channels, what we call it, within what we have. And so rather than saying, hey, we have so much information that you're going to get on a daily basis, I already know that you don't want to read most of this. You want what you want. And so how do we personalize the experience a little bit for you and tailor that to you? And so what that means is having branded channels. And so it's taking the conventional food and sports and business and renaming them into something that's a little bit different, having its own social channels, having its own homepages and all of these sorts of things, and building experiences around that. And so what we've found is that, you want certain things, how about we give it to you? You tell us what you want, you can bookmark what you want, you can follow what you want. We don't have to say, here's just one property for you to follow and get your information from. There's multiple things. And so that's the way that we've shifted, is just going more personalized, more, you tell us what you want and we'll give you what you want, and then we'll throw a little bit more on top.
And do you think you've benefited or been hindered by the lack of the legacy conventional infrastructure, say, that maybe Shauna and Marissa benefit from?
I mean, I would be a fool to say that that we haven't benefited from it. We came in with this without much knowledge, without having to follow certain norms. We got to do things with a blank slate and say, how do we want to create it and how do we want to start? And so that's the way that we've been growing along the years. We've been adding in different pieces and bringing in people who have some different experiences. And so you get people who are really focused on just content creation, but at the same time, you have people who say, all right, I've got over 10 years of journalism experience. And so you pair those two together and you get to have the happy medium of both.
I do miss that. Just kind of like flying under the radar.
Yeah, you
Get
do
away
what you
with
want.
some
There's no red tape. Like if you want to do something, you pretty much can do it. You just pitch it. If we all agree, and let's go. Let's stop waiting.
That's really interesting. Marissa, so segueing into the role of a host or a journalist, you just mentioned they're flying under the radar.
I miss it.
Yeah. So in the past, a journalist, an anchor, they sort of did their story, they created their work, they presented it to the world, and then they moved on to the next story the next day. And it was a very sort of a linear type model. Now it's not that way anymore. You're probably expected to interact, whether you want to interact or not. You're forced into it. It's not a matter of just running into people at a grocery store anymore. Anyone, anywhere in the world can now access you directly. How do you find that, and how do you balance the role of being a host versus a journalist, a private figure, a public figure?
You're asking me how I deal with trolls on Twitter?
Well, a little bit.
On Instagram. Honestly, I'm not the norm. I tend to engage. I actually really like arguing on Twitter, but I've had to scale that back a little bit, only because I don't know, then you don't want to get in trouble because you're just like starting something and you just get them all riled up, and then they just want attention, so that you give them a little bit and they want a little more. But I try to, if someone's at me about something, I try to listen, how have you been? Like, how's your day? The Sarah Silverman effect, where you just you try to engage with them a little bit, because maybe they just want attention and you want to give them just a little taste of it to make their day a little better. But I do like clapping back. It's been quite fun. On Instagram, the boys on my team try to hide a lot of the negative stuff that comes in, because they deal with, we might pose a question on Instagram, just getting people to tell us what you think about the story or whatever it is, and then that gives them the option to write a comment and send it in. So sometimes there are things like, I'd like you to make me a sandwich, or I don't know, I can't swear here, I'm assuming. Shut the F up. Like stuff like that, I'll just get back, because you're giving people a window to be negative because they can be, and it's funny. But I do come from a Reddit world. I come from a video game world where that's just a normal thing. It's a funny thing to interact with somebody and insult them in some way. So I try not to take offense to a lot of this stuff and just take it with a grain of salt. But sometimes, words cut deep. And I just have to take a step back from social media for a second, take a deep breath, collect myself, go back in and just fire back. Feels good.
So Farhan, what about for you or the people that work at the Daily Hive? How do you balance that role of being a public journalist or a public figure while also trying to maintain some journalistic integrity?
I mean, I think to say that you can't have a personality and also uphold ethics is wrong. In fact, I think you have to do both. You have to show personality. It's how we show that we're different. It's how we show that that people want to follow you, and you attract like-minded individuals. And so we're always saying to our staff, I'm always saying to my staff that go out there and be out there. Obviously, be careful with what you're doing. Don't say the wrong thing, and think about what you're going to post. But don't be afraid to show your side, because if you do that, then people are going to want to come along for the ride, and they're going to be attached to you. They're going to have that personal relationship. That's why social media works so well. That's why people follow each other. It's that you want to get insight into what's happening, and in some ways you're going to like what that person is doing, both metaphorically and also actually. And so that's the one thing that we're always pushing. Be yourself, go out there, have that personality, go on stage and show people who you are. Post that through social, but don't do it in a two-faced way where you're one thing online and you're one thing offline. Be that one person and own it. And then if you do that, then you're going to have a stronger brand, which means that we will have a stronger brand, and it's a win-win relationship.
On the way over, I always like to engage on how people consume media, how they consume news, where they get it from. So I take the opportunity to grill everybody I encounter. So, talking to my Uber driver on the way down, you work for Global News, and where are you going, and what are you talking about? And so I started to probe him on where he got his news from. As a segue to the question I'm going to ask you, Shauna, he didn't seem to really understand the difference between commentary, news, pundits, CNN, how that connects back to news. So what do you think the role is for organizations such as mine and yours, and more broadly, for sort of being really clear on what those lines are between a journalist and a commentator, or is it important at all?
Yeah, I think it is important because we do have people who are paid for their opinion, but the majority of the journalists who work for Global News across the country are not paid for their opinion. So we really try to make sure that we're clear on that. We put a bunch of red labels on any commentary or opinion pieces that we post on our website, and when we share that out on social, at the risk of repeating ourselves, we put it in all cap letters, commentary, or this is an opinion, that sort of thing. Because we want there to be personality shown, because ultimately people follow the people that resonate with them, right? I mean, a brand is a brand is a brand is great, but it's really the people behind the brand that people tend to that the audience tends to gravitate towards. So we want to make sure that we're having that balance. That if you're not paid for your opinion, and it's possible that you're going to be reporting on this story, you probably shouldn't share it widely on social media, but that you can still have some personality. You can still talk about the team that you're rooting for, or some passion that you have, because that's part of your brand as well as being a journalist who covers politics. You can be a political reporter and also still enjoy sports, and you can share both of those things as long as you're sort of doing it in an authentic way. Yeah.
And Marissa, you, as a sort of a front-facing journalist, do you feel comfortable sharing your opinion on things?
I did when I was flying under the radar a little bit more with my other media companies. Now I have to think twice before I tweet about things like Don Cherry or other things that everyone in Canada is talking about. Like, I'm from Saskatchewan, you're from Saskatchewan. There's Wexit happening. I don't know what I can comment on because I don't want to, you know what I mean? Like, although it's my home, I feel like I should stay out of politics because that's not my lane, and I'm definitely told to be in my lane from people on Twitter if I talk about politics in any way. Like, there's a lot of clapback there. You don't, when you're commenting on another broadcaster or another broadcast, you just feel like you want to respect that and kind of leave it where it is. But you also want to jump in because, again, you want to get that following. Like, you want to have personality. You want to put something out there for people to hold on to, because that's what gets likes and shares on social media. So it's really a fine line now where I might even tweet something, and then honestly I'll take a step back, I'll look at it again, and I'll just go back and delete it. I get a little bit of anxiety when it comes to tweeting now certain opinions about things, even though I try to remain empathetic and not take a side either way. It's just, no matter what, you're going to upset people, and that's the last thing that you want to do as a front-facing journalist, but it's going to happen.
Well, yeah, and a good segue to upsetting people and, potentially upsetting advertisers. And, we're all involved in the business of journalism as well as the storytelling of journalism. Farhan, maybe you can describe sort of, how does that relationship between the journalism that you do and the business that you're trying to run play out for your organization?
So I think it's acknowledging that we are a business and we're here to make money, and that we're going to try to be sustainable and long-lasting and not be gone in a year from now. And so that's prefacing it with every person that joins the team. Going back a little bit, we've gone through many different stages. One where we were going through a gray time where that line was so murky. Then we went black and white, and then we realized that that doesn't work. And so not to say that those lines need to be crossed, but those two teams and those two sides have to be having a conversation. They need to know what's going on. And so right now we've got a branded content studio called Hive Labs, and they're really focused on creating the best content for brands and storytelling for brands that fits our voice and tone, that fits our site. And then at the same time, we've got the reporters and journalists who are going and trying to do the best work that they can. But there's often times that the two sides are talking, and so if we're working with, let's say, a restaurant as an example, and we're trying to put some content out, and our branded team is coming up with what that's going to look like, they're going to have a conversation with maybe our food editor and say, hey, here's what we're thinking, what do you think? And it's just giving some advice or giving some opinions, and maybe it's, hey, maybe change your headline up or go with this imagery instead of this imagery. It's not literally having a hand in on what's being created, but it's giving advice and guidance on what that could look like, and so that it's better for our audience. Our reporters, our journalists, the editors, they know our audience best, and so it's working with them to say, here's a brand that we're trying to work with. Hey, also we need to make money, so we need to make this successful so that they're going to come back to us and other people are going to come back to us. But how do we do this in the best way possible? And so it's having those conversations. It's looking at things and saying, should we cover this? And so oftentimes there's open conversations about, hey, we're working with this advertiser, maybe we shouldn't be covering this. And then you have to have the fight, and both sides come to the table and say, all right, what is the business benefit? If we write this story, are they going to drop the campaign with us? If they drop the campaign for us, then you're not going to get paid. If you don't get paid, the company doesn't run. If the company doesn't run, well, then we're all looking for jobs. So it has to be this ecosystem.
Yeah, Shauna, do you want to jump in on that too? Certainly, I know that relationship historically has been sort of a little bit hands-off between news and journalism and sales and business. How have you seen that evolved?
Yeah, and it still is to a certain extent, because it needs to be. We don't want to have a journalist feel pressured, one way or another about how to cover a story. So there's a bit of a separation. I'm a manager, so I tend to have a lot of those conversations with our branded content team, or about maybe some new contract that's going to make us some money with Facebook or Twitter or whoever. And I'll let the team know that when I ask them to do something, it's because it's for the bottom line, it's because we need to monetize this video, or because we're putting something out on our social channel, because an advertiser is paid for a sponsored post, which is labeled and they can see it. But I tend to have a lot of those conversations with the business dev team and elsewhere on my own, just to keep the journalists putting out the journalism.
And Marissa, do you feel that relationship between sort of the business that you're involved in and the journalism that you're communicating, promoting?
Oh, sorry, my mic. I do this for a living. Yeah, I do. We're a little different with the team at Bar Down, because I do really work with them every single day. So after we're done shooting Digital Sports Center, I'm with them every single week. We do meet with marketing and brand partnerships to discuss what we're working on and how we can maybe integrate a certain brand into whatever the next YouTube video might be. Because we're digital first, we're always looking for different brands. Like right now, the Bar Down Boys are on a road trip to Calgary with a partnership with Enterprise. So it's sponsored the whole way through. And those videos actually do very well on TSN's YouTube as well, even because it's personality first, and that's what we're driving there. And instead of reporting on news with these brands, we're able to just be ourselves and showcase our own personality. So it's very separate. Like there's no, in these meetings with brand partnership, we're not talking about just me stepping back if it's about something in Digital Sports Center. Like we were sponsored by Advil, so obviously I'm not going to talk about Tylenol on Digital Sports Center, just things like that. But I don't need to worry about stuff like that, because with the brands that we bring on, they're just kind of like left to the side. I don't need to really worry about journalistic integrity in that sense. I guess that's what's good about sports. So it's a nice side of sports, for sure.
Yeah, and Shauna, I think we've got a little bit of time here, not a great deal, but you mentioned some of the partnerships. Maybe you can just sort of describe that relationship. It is a little different than, say, an advertiser relationship.
Yeah, I mean, we have a couple of partnered, we partner with Twitter, we partner with Facebook, where we have ads that run before and during our content. So the content is the content that we're producing for, often actually it's TV, it's morning show content. So it was actually made for a TV audience, but we're putting it out on our social platforms. Sometimes we're captioning it with the idea that most people don't end up listening or watching with the sound on, right? Our audio radio clipping service also has ads with it, so there's that. And then we also have we do have branded content partnerships, and that's similar to the commentary. Like it's very clearly labeled, right? But our audience, we've been able to grow the audience, and now we've been able to value it in a certain way, so that if someone wants a tweet to go with that advertorial piece that goes on the website, if they want a corresponding tweet or Facebook post, they're paying for that because our audience is that valuable, right? So for the longest time, it's really been about growing the audience so that we can also make sure that we're adding to our bottom line.
Great. So I think we wanted to leave some opportunity now to take some questions from the audience. So I think there's some microphones making their way to you. If you raise your hand, they'll come your way. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for sharing some of your time today. I want to talk about economics. So obviously, TV ad sales have decreased. Like we have Netflix to thank for that. Like print publication, there's that industry is struggling. Like, can you give some insight about the economics? Like, is there retraining happening of people who are in like print publication, to move into digital? Like, what's happening on the ground?
Yeah, maybe Shauna, do you want to tackle that one first? Is it sort of something I know that?
Yeah, just briefly. I mean, this has been an ongoing thing, and I worked at the Toronto Star before that, and some of my job was to make sure that people could sort of file for the website, right, with the idea that a lot of things are moving into digital. So the retraining is kind of constant. You know, you don't just have a reporter, you have a digital journalist. You have often someone who's also shooting and producing their own stuff, right? And then filing for all platforms. So we're doing that. I mean, I think we're realizing that, I mean, there's advertising, there's revenue potential on our website, and there is so on social as well. So we're just taking advantage of that. Maybe it doesn't come close to the kind of dollars that we're seeing for a traditional TV ad, but it's, as time goes on, the audience is migrating to online and social. So we need to make sure that we're playing in that space too.
And Farhan, is that a different experience for you?
Yeah, I don't know what you guys are talking about. I mean, we're always training. How display ads worked 5 years ago is completely different to how they are now, and so it's bringing in the right people who know what they're doing and can be able to monetize what it is that we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, similar to what Shauna was saying, we have reporters that will go out. I definitely totally take advantage of reporters already out there doing their thing for linear, and if they have an exclusive with an athlete, I will get them to record something on a phone that we can use for our show on Instagram. So just repurposing, and then that way they like to be part of the digital side too. It's fun because we just get to be a little more loose and laid back, and I think that's nice. Just when you're used to linear, it's so nice to kind of like sit back a little bit and have a little more fun. And we're able to make money off of that stuff as well, which is nice.
Great. Any other questions?
First of all, guys, thank you for your time. Much appreciated. My question is for Marissa and Rob. Going back to your electric playground days, a little bit more familiar with your video game career as opposed to your sports career per se. But I'm curious about how have you married those two worlds together? Do you find that you're using a lot of video game tactics in the sports world from a storytelling perspective, from a journalism, from a capturing audience perspective? How have those two worlds come together?
You're going to start to see more of that soon, especially in the new year. Obviously, esports is a very hot word right now and has been for the past year. And traditional sports has been trying to get into esports. But it's really hard to do that and do it organically and reach an audience that believes you, especially in esports. There is a lot of gatekeeping there, and as you know, with the gaming community, there's a lot of gatekeeping there as well. So I'm trying to approach it in a way where I have to utilize the sports audience, the audience that Bar Down already has. So I will then take the audience that they've already accrued and use that to hopefully our benefit with gaming. So we're going to slowly see it with us just having like game nights. I've introduced them to different party games we can play. They always want to keep it on the sports side because, well, it's sports, but I'm not, as you know, if you watch me on Electric Playground, I don't like sports games. So I'm going to try to put in whatever I can when I can, and we'll keep it more sports-based in the beginning, but even just like using athletes that come by, we can have a 1v1 in Chell, or whatever it might be, just to showcase, because athletes love to game. So I'm gonna be obviously honing in on that a little bit more. You're going to see more of that content happen, and we're able to do it. Like I've covered a couple of different esports events as well, and we put it on IGTV and YouTube, and that's where those things live. Hopefully, we'll see a little bit more of it on linear and maybe radio. But outside of that, yeah, it's been digital. You're going to see more of it on digital. I'll share on my channels.
That's great. I think news has a big opportunity there to launch more news video games. How to tell a story that's fair and balanced. That'll be great. It'll be very popular, I suspect. I think we've got time for one more question.
Hi, thanks again for coming up on the stage. My name's Adam. I'm a journalist, and I know that in newsrooms across the board, you know, traditional and digital as well, it's budgets are tight. I'm just wondering, how does innovation, how does experimentation, how do you factor that into you know, this type of business ecosystem that's increasingly getting, you know, a tight ship to run? Like, where do you find space to try to reach new audiences and kind of take risks and things like that?
Yeah, that seems like one of those legacy transition questions that Shauna will be ideally poised to answer for us.
Just quickly, in case others have something to share. So we experiment a little bit, and we check the analytics, and we check the ROI. You know, I mean, maybe it's just good practice, even if it doesn't take off, or it was something, you know. But we have to make sure that we're hitting all of our other priorities, right? So, example would be we have a TikTok account now, right? We actually started it before some of the more disturbing censorship headlines came out. Just so you know, we'd already started it prior to that.
It's okay. I'm on TikTok too.
Okay. Yeah, I know. I almost feel like we have to have a little disclaimer, though. So we're on there. We're still kind of checking it out. You know what I mean? We're playing around with it. We're reaching a much younger audience in this way, much as we did with experimenting with Snapchat. But we don't do as much on Snapchat anymore because it hasn't been worth our time. Instagram's more worth our time. So there's a little bit of experiment, but also check the analytics and check the, you know, have a question about the ROI, and then change or drop it if it doesn't seem to be hitting some of those priorities for you.
And then Farhan, have you know, you may not be transitioning from a sort of a legacy model, but are you having to adapt and change already?
Yeah, definitely. Changing is one of the things that we've been doing ever since day one. It's looking at seeing what's working and not working. I think one of the things that we've transitioned from, and it's tough because we are a small independent organization, and so budgets are very, very tight. But it's having assumptions and then going and testing those assumptions. And so it's saying that the way that we used to work was, hey, if you don't have to spend money, don't spend money. Now it's, if you can spend money to make money, well, then go ahead and spend it and try it and see if it works. And so it's taking that assumption to say, if we try X, we will get Y. Let's go and spend it. We're not going to be spending tens of thousands of dollars, but if something's going to cost us $2,000 and we know that the assumption is we can make 10 off of it, let's go test it. If it works, great, let's go do it in full force. Now let's move on to the next one. And so it's being agile in that way to adapt and always look at analytics, always look at what's working and not working, change them. Even when you think something's going to be working, it might last a year and then it's going to stop working. So you're always having to change and adapt on the go, always.
Because algorithms, right?
And then, and Marissa, you talked about sort of, you know, the new platforms that you're going to be working on. As a broader organization, do you see sort of that change happening around you, even though you might be sort of in the vanguard of that change?
Oh yeah, completely. You're just seeing a lot of different broadcasters obviously go digital. Obviously linear is still going to be the money maker. It has been from time, and I think will continue to be for another 5 or 10 years. But it's just nice to see the transition. And I had a little bit of baby burn with my show EP Daily, like you mentioned. We were on linear television, and the reason why it was canceled from TV is because Twitch happened and YouTube happened, and people were getting their gaming content on those platforms. But by the time we had taken the time to figure it out that our stuff needs to go on YouTube as well as linear, it was already too late. The market was already saturated, and we were just drowned, basically. We just had to get out, and that's why that show, unfortunately, was no longer on the air. Vic's still making a run for it on YouTube, like he's doing his thing on YouTube Gaming, but there's never going to be that money there again. So we have to just constantly be looking at what's next, which is why we're all on TikTok and doing that as well now, because it's always about the next youngest thing to reach the youngest audience, because that's what's going to grow with you.
Great. Okay, I think that concludes this session. Thank you all for attending and coming out here. And thank you to our panelists as well. Appreciate you.